And welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of the New York Gamer channel. This is episode 4. I can't believe it. 5th if you consider episode 0, which was an introductory. But no, this is really a 4th episode, and I'm loving this so far. The hits and views are definitely not high, but I state this in every episode, and I don't do this to be humble. It's just, this is really for me. And for people like me who really enjoy gaming stories, gaming news, discussions, retro stuff, and anything related to the wonderful hobby of gaming. And this episode, I wanted to take it back and do something special. I wanted to look at the lasting cultural impact that Vice City had on gaming. There was a time before Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and there was a time after. Basically, everything that came after. Everyone talks about Grand Theft Auto these days. They talk about GTA 5 and all the millions of versions it's getting, and I've complained in previous episodes that it's too much. But it's also a testament to the quality that Rockstar outputs versus every other AAA developer in the industry. So you can't take that away from them. But it is annoying at times because you want something new from them. So that's where that animosity comes from. At least I know that's what it comes from me. So in this episode, I'm going to really just focus on Vice City. You're going to see some great footage of the 10th anniversary edition. That's the iOS edition because I love my PlayStation 2 edition. That's the edition I started and will stay on. But in terms of just, not to make anyone get a headache, trying to look at sub-HD visuals in the old PS2 era, which I love, it's just more visually appealing to press play on a YouTube video these days and see somewhat HD. And this iOS version at least allows us to see a more cleaned up texture version of the title. So the premise of this video was really just to recognize how far the industry had come from its inception up until 2002 when GTA Vice City launched. There was a lot of ground covered. There was a lot of things that came out, a lot of really notable things that came out in those decades, in the 80s, in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s. And of course, there were gaming in the late 70s as well, and early 70s. But really in my time period of when I've been gaming, which is from late 80s till present, I had an Atari controller in my hands at 2 years old and playing with my cousins. So I know for sure that I was a witness to watch the evolution of gaming. And once we get to 2002, the landscape is already starting to shift. You had the launch of Grand Theft Auto 3 just a year before, and that was the first 3D title in the GTA series. Before that, they were top-down views. So it was a huge thing when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out. And it did revolutionize open-world gaming. But the reason I focus on Vice City is because Vice City did that and so much more. Vice City took that nugget, that piece of gold that was already changing the industry and everyone was taking notice, and really kind of just busted the doors open in every way possible for the gaming industry as a whole, let alone the Grand Theft Auto franchise, let alone Rockstar Games. Now, since 1997, Grand Theft Auto has had its hefty share of controversy, lawsuits.
The Supreme Court has struck down a California law that would have banned the selling of violent video games to children.
Rated M, meaning you have
rather than the video game industry make billions of dollars glorifying death and
ABC's Bill Green. There is a growing concern on Capitol Hill that parents who buy some of those games may not realize just how much violence they're getting.
Stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace.
Lawsuits. But it's also changed the face of gaming forever. And like I said, there are certain markers in history for music, for movies, for politics, for technological innovations, and video gaming. And for gaming, There was console gaming before GTA Vice City and everything that came after. Within there was a time before Vice City and everything that came after Vice City. Launching on October 29th of 2002, Vice City and Rockstar Games were taking a huge bet on producing something that was culturally on the fringe regarding raw violence, sexuality, disregard for political correctness. But in 2002, video games were not pushing those boundaries yet. Certain games here and there, maybe like a Duke Nukem, titles that weren't in the mainstream were trying to hit that kind of fringe. GTA Vice City really blew the door open for that. And not only that, before Vice City, video games in general were never viewed as cinematic experiences, nor were they recognized ever for a Hollywood cast of voice talent. Vice City changed that. Vice City changed all the views by blowing open the doors to a new generation of gaming and entertainment. For the first time, traditional video game conventions were pushed aside with this new open world, period piece, Hollywood-voiced, licensed soundtrack, vulgarity-laced title receiving cinematic credibility. Vice City was impossible to ignore, since it had been a cultural credential of high production value. Celebrity association and recognition, it had the potential to skyrocket, and boy it did. Vice City became one of the best-selling and most influential games of the last 20 years. The game would eventually release after the PS2 launch on the original Xbox, years later come to Mac OS, iOS, Android, and other platforms. But the memory for me is really in the PlayStation 2. And it's amazing to think this title in the pre-digital sales era, we're talking pre-2008, before there were digital storefronts for consoles, this title sold 18 million copies. 18 million copies at a time where digital sales weren't even an option. There was no digital version of this title. You had to physically go to a store and purchase it. So to me, sales for physical sales always matter more than digital in terms of motivation. In terms of, it's so easy to sit on your ass, go through a digital storefront, and just click on a digital button and download a digital game. Because there's no effort involved. With Vice City, in this time period of gaming, in 2002, there had to be effort involved. You had to drive to a store to get it. You had to beg your parents to take you to get it, with the hope that they didn't know what the hell you wanted to buy. Because if they did, A, they were either cool parents, or B, they had no desire to allow you to play a game with pornography, cursing, violence, and everything else. So you either had cool parents or you had responsible parents. I had cool parents. So I was able to go buy it. And the memory is just so vivid for me. I still could remember the countdown clock on Rockstar's website in 2002 for the unveiling of the first teaser trailer. I was so hyped after playing the in and outs, the guts of Grand Theft Auto 3. I knew whatever they make next, Rockstar, it is going to be insane. Because in 2001, playing Grand Theft Auto 3, there was nothing like it. Before that, I was playing GoldenEyes and Silent Hills and Resident Evils and Siphon Filters and Donkey Kongs and Crash Bandicoot and Mario Brothers and Sonics. So Grand Theft Auto 3 comes along and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And then when I see the trailer, countdown clock for Vice City, the next Grand Theft Auto, I'm like, oh my God. I remember the dial-up internet of waiting and refreshing a page back when I had the slowest internet connection. It's 2002 and I still have dial-up in my house. And I guess I'm fortunate enough just to have internet in the house. And the first teaser trailer gets unveiled, which you'll see here. And then subsequent trailers after. And I was just hooked. That was it. It was immediate, jaw-dropping. Oh my God, I don't know half this music. I'm 14 years old. This is music that was my decade, but when I was still a youngster. But it's in the 80s. It's super colorful. The color palette's completely different from Grand Theft Auto 3. There's boats in here with tropical looking water. Hawaiian shirts, machine guns, helicopters, and I'm like, sign me in. I need to get this title. It was amazing. Also, another amazing aspect of Vice City was its voice cast. Prior to Vice City, it was very rare to hear that A-list celebrities, let alone actors, were voicing video game characters. Rockstar changed the game with this. There weren't a lot of A-list actors doing voiceover work in video games before the Grand Theft Autos came along. Bonafide movie stars. Ray Liotta, starring as the protagonist, Tommy Vercetti. Ray Liotta was famous for a slew of movies. Everyone will know him from Goodfellas, but he had a string of huge hits in the 80s and 90s before and after that. You had the legendary late Burt Reynolds. Smokey and the Bandit. Come on now. Dennis Hopper. Philip Michael Thomas, who was in the original Miami Vice, who co-starred along Don Johnson. You had L.T. Lawrence Taylor, famous football star. William Fitcher. Danny Trejo. Robert Davi. Tom Sizemore, and so many other actors. Now, you may not know all these actors, depending on your age, but the fact is, trust me when I tell you, the budget alone just to pay this cast before you even start making the game is insane. And the subsequent sales figures of this title after launch sent a signal to Hollywood that legitimate celebrities could be featured in video games. Vice City did this for the industry. They sent a signal out that Hollywood, come on in and start voicing games because you can do it. It can be profitable. It can be highly profitable, successful, and you will gain an entire new fan base of younger people who may have not known your movies if they're only 10, 12, 15. And again, this was in the day where youngsters, people 10 and below, were playing games with hookers and flamethrowers and machine guns. This was all new, but it was happening. If this game launched today, there would be 1 million warning labels slapped on it, and there would be certain preventions the console would do to make sure it would muted out the cursing. Very few games in the history of modern video gaming had the kind of permanency that GTA Vice City had. This game has not only been able to bring back fans from the original 2002 launch, but also found new audiences purely due to its irrefutable quality. Even with how dated some of the elements of the game can feel, Vice City still manages to be one of the most celebrated games ever. There are way too many reasons for players to dust off an old copy of Vice City on PS2 and spend hours in this neon paradise. For gamers who played it at launch, like me, you could literally go back to these virtual streets you grew up playing on. Gamers have vivid memories attached to the game, just like a lot of games we have vivid memories attached to. The locations, the music. It's one of the most monumental achievements in open world design, and a significant one. It's also a perfect time capsule of where you were in 2002 or 2003 or 2004, whenever you discovered Vice City and whenever you first stepped into the shoes of Tommy Vercetti. Where you were, what was going on in your life, who was around you, what you felt. It's this multi-sensory emotional experience. It's also an exercise to see just how far gaming has come and also how much you've evolved as a gamer from that day. And did I mention the soundtrack? Holy shit, the soundtrack. GTA Vice City absolutely nails an era. Every track is a certified legendary hit. For many, Vice City's radio stations were the introduction to the first funky, fist-pounding, eccentric tracks of the 80s. The thing that makes it so remarkable is that it isn't narrowed down to a single genre. Rockstar was able to curate genres across the 80s, from rock, heavy metal, pop, hip-hop, reggae, and so much more. Electronica. Music curator critics have often cited GTA Vice City as having one of the best soundtracks and music collections of the 80s and in gaming. Period. To the point where fans have purchased millions of copies of the soundtrack by itself. The game's soundtrack was so popular, Rockstar produced a 7-disc compilation CD box set containing over the 103 tracks that were in GTA Vice City. If that's not telling you how much of a game changer the soundtrack was, let alone thinking back, this is 2002. There's not a huge blow up of iTunes yet. It's still the early days of purchasing music CDs in person, whether it's Sam Goody, it's Sam Ash, Tower Records. You know, yes, I'm bringing up all this stuff. You may have not heard of any of these stores if you're under 30. These were all stores that I would go to at my age and look through the CDs and look through the cassettes and try to listen to samples if they had them. When you're looking at this footage now, you're seeing a game that was so revolutionary in 2002. And if you're younger, it may be hard to conceptualize how much of a game changer this is, because you may be looking at this as some dated title that looks not very inspiring compared to what you're playing now, where there's just so much going on and you have photorealism and movie budget quadruple what Vice City was. But you have to think back 19 years ago. This title was beyond a game changer. This title would set a roadmap, set a marker forward to every other gaming developer. The gaming industry is going into a new territory where we're going to be recognized by cinema people. We're going to be recognized by Hollywood in general. We're going to be recognized by other gaming studios. That this business is about to go up a couple of notches. And every decade there's games that do that and propel the industry forward. The Grand Theft Auto franchise in general continues to do that. But Grand Theft Auto Vice City, more than any other title in those days, I think more than 3, even more than San Andreas. I love San Andreas, but there was something about Vice City that kicked that door open and created the roadmap for all genres. Even if they weren't open world genres, everybody put more effort. And this is just feeling. I can't say this by fact, but I can say by seeing what came out in the subsequent years. I know for a fact so many games were inspired by having a bad protagonist as the main character. You're playing as the baddie. You're owning properties. That was a new mechanic. You were part of the game that was integral to the main story, was owning properties, managing them, purchasing them, and taking over territory and becoming a crime boss. And then the second half of the game, taking on your old boss for control of the city. You know, prior to this, it was a secret agent you're playing as, an Italian plumber jumping over pipes. It was a rookie police officer coming into a city with a zombie infestation. It could have been an ancient warrior in a green suit with a sword trying to rescue a princess in a beautiful, overgrown forest. You know, there was creativity, there was variety. This was completely different. This is a 2-bit criminal that becomes head of a criminal enterprise, and you're doing the most horrible shit you can throughout the entire game. And you're looking damn cool while you're doing it, driving a 2-door sports car, blasting 80s music, driving over a bridge with palm trees and tropical looking water. And it was just so different. And for those of you who remember playing back in those days, you had to be there. Just like probably your parents tell you or grandparents tell you, you had to be there. It was one of those things for gaming history. You had to be there. It was really something to see. And I look back now and I look at the footage here and I just think, I can't believe we got this in 2002. And I'm also so glad we did, because it's interesting to think of what would the industry look like today if the Grand Theft Auto franchise had never launched. If Grand Theft Auto was never a thing, or if it had launched, if it only stood as a top-down view title and never entered the 3D world, never entered the open world, what would the gaming landscape look like? Would someone else have come up with this? It's hard to say, you don't know. But my bet is, if it wasn't for Rockstar, our entire gaming industry would be completely different today. And maybe a lot of other developers wouldn't have taken as many risks or pushed the boundaries if it had not been for Rockstar being one of the early people to push boundaries. And again, I love all previous titles. I'm a huge fan, but jumping through pipes and saving princesses isn't exactly pushing boundaries. Using a licensed title from a James Bond movie and rescuing, killing Russians. It's not really pushing boundaries. But scoring drugs, killing a hooker, shooting up a club, and then hopping in a helicopter for a drink at a bar, that was pushing boundaries. I think now it's still, that's tame. It's definitely tame compared to what's out now, but it for sure was pushing boundaries. There's a figure of over $600 million in lawsuits when Vice City launched from a slew of people. It caused such an uproar at the time. One famous person was Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, former presidential candidate. He was one of the major proponents, along with parents groups, the usual boring pastors and religious leaders. There was so many people knocking on Rockstar's door saying, you cannot release this. And once it came out, you need to take this off shelves. It's going to cause kids to do this, this, and this. Studies have proven it's all bullshit. Video games don't contribute to violence. Video games are a beautiful hobby. The only thing they'll contribute to is maybe gaining weight and low motivation to do any exercise. I'll admit that. Other than that, it's a wonderful hobby, and that's why I love doing this channel, and I love talking about games. And I thought this episode would be brief, but important just to talk about the effect that Vice City had on the industry, from my point of view. 18 million plus sales, changing genres forever, changing gaming forever, changing the way games are viewed, and it elevated it from a simple hobby to cinematic experiences that were recognized coast to coast by Hollywood, by major business leaders, by mayors. Grand Theft Auto Vice City left an indelible imprint on the gaming industry, and I'm grateful for Rockstar, but I'm mostly grateful to have been alive during that time and been able to play it at launch, because there's a special benefit when you got to enjoy it when it first came out, rather than people experiencing it now. If you haven't, please go back and learn where gaming evolved from. There was gaming that evolved from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. But moving forward, gaming really evolved, for open world especially, from those early 2000s, late 90s. And this is one stellar example to take a look at, because it's a work of craftsmanship that people will talk about for generations to come. As always, I hope you enjoy the content. Next episode, I'm going to have something special coming up. Hope you enjoyed this little bit of retroness, the footage. This footage was all captured by me. Most of the footage that I show on this channel, if not all of it, will always be me, unless it's trailers. Obviously, trailers are created by the company themselves. So please hit that comment, like, and subscribe button. Really would appreciate it. I'd also appreciate the feedback. I've gotten a few messages of people who have asked my motivations for certain episodes. Honestly, the motivations just come to my head like any other content creator. It's what I feel I want to talk about. But please message me if you want to hear a topic or you want to send in a question. You have the information. Comment, like, subscribe. The contact information is all on the page. And as always, enjoy the gaming. Peace.